I have literally 10 minutes to get ready, but let's talk about this. I'm gonna put on lashes today. So you want to be a dispatcher. So you're going to want to start by applying at your local 911 center. Now, typically when you apply, you can usually do it all online. At least in my agency, you can. There's going to be a huge, thick background check application package for you to fill out. Now, with the application, you're going to be filling out extensive, address history. You're going to be putting a bunch of references, all the jobs you've worked at since you first started working, probably. And then, at least with my application, it also included a part to give my consent for a background check and a credit score check and all those things. Now, depending on how desperate your agency is for dispatchers, you should hear back, relatively quickly. I applied at my agency at the end of December 2018, and I heard back, I believe, at the beginning of January 2019. So when I heard back from my agency, I was asked to schedule a critical test, which I took as quickly as possible because I wanted the job really bad. The test basically is a very basic test, just making sure that you can perform the most basic skills that a dispatcher needs to have. I've already made a video about it, but basically, it's comprised into different sections such as map reading, memory, skills, typing, being able to know the basic what units would need to go to what kind of call, that kind of thing. So that test took me about an hour. I think it kind of just varies. Usually you can take however long you need on the test. And then after that, once I was told I passed, I was then asked to come in and do what's called an observation or a dispatcher sit-in. Kind of like how, police do like ride-alongs. This is like sitting down on the floor, the dispatch floor, with a dispatcher and learning about the job. Okay, so by the way, every time I went into this building for any test, interview, anything, I was wearing basically a suit. For my critical, I wore professional dress pants, and I wore a dressy blouse. And then when I had my sit-in on the floor, I wore basically a casual pantsuit with a nice blouse. So I had my dispatcher sit-in. By the way, I know that my eyes are really red right now. I know. You don't have to tell me. I just got something in my eye, and also I don't sleep. So during my sit-in, unfortunately, it wasn't busy at all. They actually had more staffing than normal, and the dispatcher I was sitting with was working a very slow law console. So I did the best that I could to ask questions that I thought were relevant or that would make me sound, interested in the job, because I was. And then after my observation, during my observation, I was just chatting it up with these women in an appropriate way. I was, telling them about, my kids at home, and I was asking them, how did you get into this job? How are you liking it? Just try to think of really good questions to ask that are not, annoying or too personal and too invasive. Just make sure you're super thankful that they had you. Be just very gushy and say thank you so much for having me. I really loved watching you work. So after, and the order can depend on just your agency or whatever their policy is. But after my on the floor interview or observation, I was then scheduled a, board interview. Okay, hi, jump scare. So I'm not doing my makeup anymore, and it's the end of the day, actually. I'm just getting off work. So after your observation, at least in my agency, we do the full interview with either a panel or whether it be, the chief of police. I'm not sure how it would work on your agency. Not sure how it would work for your agency, but at my agency, I had an interview with, I think it was just the two supervisors at the time. You might have an interview with the director for your agency, but there will be a sit-down interview where they ask a whole bunch of questions. I did just talk about that in another video yesterday. They're going to ask you a lot of questions about how you handle conflict. How do you think you would handle a very busy environment? How would you handle an officer safety issue where you have, let's say, a child who's drowning on the phone and then your officer is crying out for help on the radio? How do you handle conflict with your coworkers? Just a lot of things like that. What made you want to get into this job? Anyway, after the interview, at least at my agency, I was then offered a conditional offer of employment. So they said, we like you, we want you to work here, but you still have to pass the psych evaluation and the drug test. Okay, now I wasn't worried about the drug test. I don't do drugs. I've never taken anything. But I was a little bit nervous about the psych evaluation. However, I did lots of research about it and found out that it's really hard to fake being not crazy. That sounds weird, but the way that the questions are, it's really hard for someone who is not fit to do the job to pass. There's a lot of questions on the psych evaluation about, have you ever had suicidal ideations before? How was your relationship with your family growing up? Not necessarily saying that if you've had a bad relationship with your family, you're going to be a bad dispatcher, but just a lot of questions about, have you ever stolen before? Have you ever felt like you had to leave a place of work? Anyway, so after all of that, you might be asked to do a polygraph depending on your agency. My agency did not require a polygraph. So after I passed the drug test and the psych, I was asked to start. This whole process could take months. For me, it took about a month to go through the entire process, and that was considered pretty fast. But yeah, that's basically the process of applying at a 911 center. Hope that helped a little bit.